Yooka-Laylee was a game I was really looking forward to. Even though I wasn't exactly in the target audience for a modern N64 style game, I very much looked forward to any new entry into this genre, as the 6th generation era of platformers is actually my favorite single genre of games. So needless to say, I was really eager to see a modern platformer hit the market, and it all started with a Kickstarter. On May 1st, 2015, Yooka-Laylee hit Kickstarter with a promise to revive 3D collectathons for a new, modern crowd. Apparently the public liked this idea, as the £175,000 target was demolished in just over a half hour, setting Kickstarter records. But it wasn't just the game that interested the crowd, it was the team behind the game. The team, who formed under the name Playtonic Games, was formed from artists, designers, writers, developers, and other ex-employees of Rareware, a company later known as Rare. The promise was to not only revive 3D collectathon platformers of the past, but also to revive the specific Rare feeling that many video game fans held near and dear to their heart. The game was marketed as a spiritual successor to Rare games of the past, including Donkey Kong Country and Conker's Bad Fur Day. However, the game was primarily shown as a successor to Banjo-Kazooie and its sequel, Banjo-Tooie. The reason for a need for this spiritual successor to those IPs has been documented well over the last few years, and it's become more and more popular to jump on the Rare nostalgia bandwagon. This is largely because of JonTron's Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts video. Normally I wouldn't mention specific videos like I just did, but this is a special case. I'll explain why in a bit. Since Microsoft bought Rare in the mid-2000s, the Banjo IP has been largely dormant aside from a cameo in the Xbox 360 version of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. I've heard Microsoft has been open to the bird and bear appearing in other games like Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. Series, but I can't really find any confirming sources for that, and the series itself hasn't seen a new installment since Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts in November of 2008. Putting a long story short, Nuts and Bolts received mixed to positive reviews at the time, but has been seen more critically recently. The game left many disappointed that it wasn't the game teased at the end of Banjo-Tooie. Seeing that there was and still is an active fanbase for the old Rareware games, the arrival of Playtonic Games was initially received extremely positively. Like I said, Playtonic got the funding for YL in record time, and the game's development began. And that's where the problems began. This isn't the case of a couple major issues, but more of a few minor-ish problems that stacked up for a lot of fans. First off, even though the game was originally marketed as a fall 2016 release, the game was delayed until April 11th, 2017. This delay wouldn't have been a big deal, but around the same time Playtonic announced that the Wii U version was cancelled. This made a lot of fans upset, because a lot of the nostalgic backers were Wii U owners, staying along the Nintendo console line from the N64 days. After the Wii U disappointment, the Nintendo Switch version was soon announced to be coming at a later launch date. This was a slight problem for some because the Kickstarter stretch goal for all platforms at launch was funded. In addition, there still hasn't been a physical release announced for the Switch, meaning that fans of the original Banjo games on N64 may not be able to buy a physical release of the game they funded on the Nintendo console. Now, you may see how this is an issue, considering that quite a chunk of the fanbase for 3D platformers in Banjo, the target audience of Yooka, stayed with that Nintendo line. The game is currently out for Xbox One, PlayStation 4, PC, Mac, and Linux, with the Switch version coming out at a later date. There was also another big PR problem that the people at Playtonic encountered. JonTron, a popular YouTube comedian who was slated to make a cameo appearance in the game, said some strong things related to race and politics. I won't go into them here as it's been highly covered elsewhere, but Playtonic removed him from the game over what he said. This became an issue, as one could make a strong case that John's Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts video was the video that made Yooka-Laylee possible, and many of the project's backers were loyal fans of John. Playtonic stayed through their stance on it and kept John's voice off the game, even though they received criticism for it from people who thought that they should keep their political views out of the discussion. With delays, cancellations, and controversy covered, April 11th came, and I bought my copy of Yooka-Laylee. Before we dive into the game, I'd like to talk about what comes with the game, or rather what didn't come with the game, while comparing it to the package you received in another game funded by Kickstarter. Yooka-Laylee comes in a standard PS4 case with no manual or inserts. It also has no art in the interior cover, just warnings and text. Obviously, this isn't the biggest deal in the world, but it would have been nice to have something in there, and comparing it to Shantae Half Genie Hero, which came with a full-color manual as well as a soundtrack CD, it looks a little lackluster. Yooka produced a soundtrack CD as well, but it retails for about $30 Canadian separately from the main game. It's obviously not required to go to the length Half Genie Heroes developers did, but it would have been nice to see the extra mile put in for customers, especially since Playtonic's budget was so much bigger in comparison. Let's get the story out of the way now, as it's definitely not a big part of the game. The story begins with the evil Capital B and crew, using the Novelizer 64 to steal all the old books in town. As the device starts sucking up books, the camera cuts to Yooka and Laylee relaxing in the game's first area, Shipwreck Creek, when suddenly a book with golden pages that was lying beside them gets taken by Capital B's device. The pages all fall out of their book, become anthropomorphic, and serve as the main collectible in the game. You need pages to complete the game, but you also need a certain amount to open and expand worlds. You can get pages from main missions, Mollycool missions, Rexstro's minigames, and almost anything you do in Yooka-Laylee. After the pages are scattered, Yooka and Laylee stand up to start their mission to collect them all, and after that, the story is pretty much thrown into the background, only popping up again somewhat when the antagonistic sidekick Duck Dr. Quack pops up for one of his quiz show segments. When you first boot up the game, you see a vibrant world filled with the joyous sounds of instrumental music from Grant Kirkhope and gibberish voice acting. I know some people have criticized the voice acting, but even without the banjo nostalgia on my side, I didn't really mind it at all. Past that, there's really not a whole lot to say about the first impressions, beyond that it's a 3D platformer in 2017. And then you notice that the worlds are a bit more lifeless than you'd want them to be. Sure, they're the effects of birds chirping and most things move, but something feels a bit off from where it should be. The atmosphere is just a little lacking. When I say atmosphere, I mean it in a way as if whether it felt alive enough that I can feel myself immersed in the game experience, if I can feel myself walking and jumping through these situations. If a game accomplishes this feeling, it's both excellent and rare. My favorite example of a game doing this right is Pac-Man World 2 for the 6th gen consoles. Sure, the worlds in that game didn't exactly scream realism with the giant platforms growing from the gigantic trees, or the general linearity of the levels, but it all felt alive, because the sound effects and general atmosphere were spot on. The worlds in Yooka-Laylee should feel better, because they generally look really good, but for whatever reason, they don't have the life I was hoping for out of them. Again, this isn't a rare thing for 3D platformers to miss on, as only a few I've played impress me in this regard. The Ratchet & Clank game for PS4 didn't have that life in the levels for me either. The incredible music in Yooka-Laylee masks it enough that when all is said and done, it becomes a largely minor complaint. And that music, it's incredible. I've got some of my favorite tracks linked in the description and on the screen right now. I highly recommend you check it out. The area that succeeded in atmosphere the most for me was Capital Casino, with the sounds of slot machines and other casino-type appliances beeping and the fitting music playing. My only complaint in this world when it comes to atmosphere-related things is that the machines felt too big, and the world was too empty, with a lot of space with nothing occupying it. It just felt like it was bigger to be bigger. And really, that's a problem with the majority of the game. Even with levels that can stay focused, the general feel of each world is that it's either slightly too big or way too big, the latter usually taking place after the Grand Tome books expand. I didn't love exploring them until I got a certain move towards the end of the game, which I'll discuss in a bit. Since you play the majority of the game without that move, it's still a problem worth talking about. Even though the worlds are really, really big, there is one way Playtonic could have masked that and made it so it was barely noticeable. Let's look at another Collectathon game as an example of what I'm talking about. The worlds in SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom are slightly different than Yooka-Laylee's in general, because they're smaller with more worlds to explore, whereas Yooka opted for bigger worlds and only 5 of them. The difference I want to point out, however, is that the shiny object collectibles in BFBB were everywhere on the maps. This gave the player incentive to explore different parts of the worlds, so even though they were smaller, you would spend a lot of time trying to get all of them that you could, and you'd explore every part of the world. In a game with 9 full worlds, not including bosses to explore, I'd imagine this is a very hard thing to accomplish as a developer, and unfortunately Playtonic Games dropped the ball on this one. The Yuka equivalent to shiny objects is quills, but there aren't very many in each world. Sure, they point you to different areas where you can complete missions, and that's adequate as their purpose, but I almost never saw quills replaying levels because they don't respawn after collection. This is an intentional design move, as they're designed to go toward 100% completion, but something about it seems off to me. I would have preferred that there were more quills to collect, and that some were to respawn, even if they didn't count toward 100%. Maybe you could make them translucent? Anyway, my main point about comparing shiny objects from BFBB and quills from Yuka is that the lack of the latter being more prevalent can really play a big part in making exploration around the worlds a bit of a chore, especially if you're going for a specific mission on the map, as there's nothing to distract you on your way there. Now, I don't have a huge issue with massive worlds in general, it's just that the game is so unforgiving with checkpoints and spawning, not to mention that the various missions around the maps are never clearly labeled. I'm hesitant to bring up BFBB again because I feel like I'm kinda comparing them at this point, but I might as well one more time. If a similar system to the bus system from Battle for Bikini Bottom was implemented here, and each mission was a checkpoint clearly listed on the pause menu, and you could warp there instantly, this game's tedious hub world and massive worlds would be so much more fun to traverse. Now to clarify, I'm not saying that this game needed the exact same system as Battle, but it could have learned from what Heavy Iron or maybe some other developers did to help with this issue, rather than sticking with only what they knew from the Rare games. While I'm talking about the worlds, other than my main issue with the size, I actually really like them. In every world there's a minecart challenge, an arcade minigame, and a shape-shifting mission in addition to the main missions. And in the second world there's even an isometric platformer area, which isn't quite my thing, but very well done regardless. With all the negatives I brought up regarding the worlds, there are a lot of positives. Each mission is laid out well, the worlds are intelligently designed, and generally give you a good time when you're in them, and next is a huge positive. In my opinion, Yooka and Laylee control extremely well, even while sliding down ice, swimming, gliding, rolling, or flying. Platonic Games clearly has this part down, as the platforming in Yooka-Laylee is phenomenal, and that alone should make you consider the game if you like 3D platformers. The biggest downfall for many platformers is bad controls, and I'm happy to report that fans don't need to worry about that with Yooka-Laylee. Well, at least the main segments, the only time the controls were a little uncomfortable for me were during Rextro's minigames. I know people were quick to bash the controls during the minecart segments, but I generally enjoyed my time with them. They were alright to control in my experience, and David Wise's music was sensational here. I still enjoyed the DK Country Returns and Tropical Freeze ones more, but these were overall pretty good for me. Going back to Rextro's games, they were heavily criticized when Yooka-Laylee was first released, and I'm not really interested in going too deeply into them here, because they're a massive diversion from the main game, but they do bring up a point that's more relevant. The frame rate issues in different areas of Yooka-Laylee. Now, I'm not usually the biggest guy to complain about frame rate. Generally, I don't pay too much attention to 30 FPS, 60 FPS, etc. But the frame rate issues during the minigames, and more importantly the bosses in Yooka-Laylee, that's inexcusable, especially considering the lackluster texturing. You shouldn't think there'd be enough stress on this game to have frame rate issues. Despite those bosses being interesting conceptually, the frame rate issues spoiled the experience for me, mostly in the swamp world where I actually died more than once because of the issues. But even without those frame rate issues, I wouldn't rush back to the bosses because the platforming is so much better. That's actually a criticism and a praise in that last sentence, as even though I believe the bosses are designed in a way that's just unentertaining and unfun due to the repetitive nature, the platforming just makes it look worse because it set a standard for the rest of the game. A lot of critics have been quick to jump on the minigames, karting sections, and other diversions from the main formula as the weakest part of Yooka-Laylee, and I have to agree. Individually, a lot of the added variety is alright to good, but compared to the main platforming that YL does so well, it just looks bad in comparison. Other than those frame rate issues though, the game looks good overall on the PlayStation 4. Some of the textures are a little bit blurry or obviously have a low polygon count, but character models look good and the game can look absolutely fantastic with the sky and overall worlds. The last thing I want to talk about in a technical sense is the save system. Considering this game is essentially trying to emulate the classic Collectathon feel in almost every way, for Yooka-Laylee to lack manual saves is a big problem for a couple of reasons. First, considering that this game is a collectathon, you'd think more thought would have been put into the fact that completionists, in my experience, generally like to reassure themselves that they've saved properly. I'm not necessarily a completionist myself, but I occasionally find myself saving more than once just to make sure I've done the process properly. And I'd assume that most completionists would want to know they're safe with their new collectibles. Without a manual save system, it's easy to see that this could be a problem. One more issue I have with the save system, combined with the worlds being too large, is that every time you boot the game up, you begin at the hub world, Ivory Towers. This wouldn't be a big deal, but it becomes a problem when you have to move around the large hub world, then maneuver around the huge Grand Tome world just to get to the individual mission you booted up the game for. I would have preferred that you boot up and were placed right next to the mission in the world, or at the very least next to the Grand Tome book. There also should have been more checkpoints in the massive worlds. In almost all the worlds, there are bottomless pits or deathly drops, mixed with precise platforming in at least one mission, and every time you die, you start at the opening book, unless you've gone into a separate area of the world separated by a loading screen. I definitely would have preferred that there were more checkpoints, since the worlds were so big, maybe around each mission or minigame area. To avoid those bottomless pits and other perils, you'll need new moves, and those new moves are provided to you by Trouser the Snake. And Trouser the Snake is one of the things that I believe the game handled extremely well. Trouser is the way the game handles the learning of new moves. He appears in the hub world to give you moves for free, and in the individual Grand Tome worlds, charging the player quills in exchange for new abilities. Through Trouser, Yooka-Laylee can learn a gliding move, a spin dash, a flying move, and more. Trouser's usage around the game is extremely well done, and the moves themselves control well and are generally useful. There's only one I didn't love, the Lizard Lash. It's a move that activates by Yooka lashing his tongue to reach a high-up target. I didn't like it so much because the targets were small, and it always had to be centered on the screen for the move to register. It would have been nice if it triggered when you were close no matter where the camera was positioned, but that's not the way it works here. Another common complaint about Yooka-Laylee was the camera, but I didn't run into much trouble with it. The only time I really thought about it was when I was struggling with the Lizard Lash. This game is at its strongest once you gain the ability to fly. After you get that late in the game, each world becomes completely different to explore, as you can take to the skies and finally unlock the potential of exploration in these worlds. Since the worlds are so big and Yooka moves relatively slowly on foot, once the initial platforming is done, I much prefer to take flight in these worlds. Playtonic's Kickstarter campaign promised a, quote, modern Rare-vival of the 3D collectathon genre, and continually released trailers and descriptions of the product they were selling, and even though the modernization of the N64 collectathon genre didn't work out as well as some had hoped, it's exactly what they promised. The game is charming, the platforming is excellent, and even with its flaws, it's a good 3D platformer in general. I'm very happy that it was released in 2017, and even with all its problems, as a fan of collectathon platformers, I'm glad to have it in my collection. If you are interested in any of the trailers or the game looks fun to you, I'd recommend you give it a try. If you weren't a fan of open world-esque platformers from the Nintendo 64 or GameCube eras, I'd steer clear. Yooka-Laylee really doesn't do anything to separate itself from those crowds. I'll leave these categories on the screen to help you make your decision. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click like. I'm going to be critically looking at the GameCube Classic SpongeBob movie game next, so make sure you click that subscribe button and then the bell to get the notification for when it arrives. Links to my Twitch, Twitter, and Discord server are in the description, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day.